From the heart.org, Medscape Cardiology, this is the Bob Harrington Show. Dr. Robert Harrington is the Stephen and Suzanne Weiss Dean of Weill Cornell Medicine and Provost for Medical Affairs of Cornell University. This podcast is intended for healthcare professionals only. Any views expressed are the presenter's own and do not necessarily reflect the views of WebMD or Medscape.
Hi, this is Bob Harrington from Weill Cornell Medicine in New York City, here on Medscape Cardiology and theheart.org. As always, we try to bring the community guests who are talking about the latest science, sometimes talking about a novel finding in clinical medicine. But on occasion, we just like to talk to people who are interesting. And today we have the real pleasure of a guest who is not just interesting, but is one of the foremost scientific thinkers of the current age. And he is going to be the featured guest at the Nobel Laureate session at the American Heart Association Scientific Session in November. So this is a great opportunity for us to preview what's going to be talked about at scientific sessions with regard first to the Nobel Laureate session, but maybe more broadly about what's new and exciting and interesting that the program leaders are going to bring us. So it's a real privilege for me to have as a guest Dr. Ardem Patapoutian. Thank you for joining us here. He is the Nobel Laureate in Medicine in 2021, and I'm going to have him explain exactly what the prize was for. He will be speaking, as I said, at the Nobel Laureate session at Scientific Session, which is one of the most exciting sessions at the American Heart Association meeting. I'm also joined by Dr. Brahmaji Nalamutho, who is a longtime friend and colleague from the University of Michigan, where he's an interventional cardiologist and a professor of medicine. And for the purposes of this discussion, Bram is vice chair of Scientific Sessions. So Bram, thanks for joining us. Ardem, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Nice to meet both of you.
Bram, let's start with you. Scientific Sessions, November, big part of the year for the Heart Association. Talk about the Nobel Laureate lecture, what it means to Scientific Sessions, and what you and Dr. Chikati, the leader of the Scientific Sessions this year, were trying to accomplish.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. And thanks, Dr. Patapoutian, for joining us, not only here today, but then also in November. We're very excited about this session in particular, but then also Scientific Sessions overall. I know, Bob, you've had a history of being the chair and vice chair in the past, as well as the president of the AHA. You know how important and foundational this meeting is for our community. I think that the Nobel Laureate session is a wonderful one. It allows us to highlight science that's active, forward-thinking. I think the ability to get Dr. Patapoutian is really exciting for us, as he'll explain a little bit. His foundational work is on the translation of mechanical sensations in touch, and they have lots of implications for lots of biologic processes around cardiovascular disease, such as blood pressure. We've been listening to folks. I think that to have somebody we call a big tent speaker like Dr. Patapoutian, he draws us in, allows us to just re-energize our community. I think it's also, I'm just going to say this, obviously his work is on touch. And we've thought a lot about what it means since the COVID-19 pandemic, about what it means to be in person, right? That feeling of touch, that feeling of community. And I think it's very fitting for us as we think through this. And so I'm really excited, and thanks again for joining us.
Oh, wow. That's a great intro. Try to explain to us, for our cardiovascular audience, what it is you study, and maybe, as we were talking off camera, some of the relevance to cardiovascular medicine and cardiovascular science.
We know that in biology, most cells communicate with each other using chemicals, whether it's a hormone or a neurotransmitter, ATP. All of these are various aspects of chemical signaling. So one area that we think that has been heavily ignored is more of the physics of communication. And, in the past, we've studied temperature sensation, but the last 15 years, we have been studying how cells sense pressure. There are a few biological systems I would call the poster child of pressure sensing, and one is touch, the other is hearing. These are senses that are dedicated to sense pressure. When I sense someone touching my hand, for example, what's happening is the pressure exerted on my skin is somehow being sensed, and within millisecond level, translating it to a chemical or electrical signal that the neurons understand and transmit to the brain. And yet we knew very little about how you sense pressure. Like, we know a lot about signal transduction of chemicals, but we knew nothing about how we sense pressure. And so my lab identified these very fast acting molecules called ion channels. We named these ion channels PIEZO 1 and 2. That is exactly what they do. They take a mechanical pressure information and turn it into chemical signal. We initially studied this because we were interested in touch and pain, but over the last 10 years, what's been really exciting, which I actually think is one of the great joys of doing basic science, is that you ask one question and then see where science takes you. We've been seeing that pressure sensing is important for so many different aspects of biology, physiology, and disease. We found that macrophages use pressure sensing to regulate their phagocytosis. We've found that PIEZOs are responsible for baroreception, PIEZO 1 and 2 together from the vagus nerve. And the studies keep taking us to directions that I never ever imagined we would study. But again, this is, I think, I'm very excited of the kind of breadth of science that this is kind of taking us into. It's challenging because I have to be expert in many different biological processes that I wasn't, but with great collaborators, we're making great headway. And I think in 10 years, I'll be able to tell you that this is a list of biology and medicine related topics that pressure sensing is important that we didn't know before identifying these molecules.
Well, I'm going to book you now then for 10 years from now, because I know that Nobel laureates are busy and that you have invitations to speak all over the world, which leads me to my next question for you is, why did you say yes to speak at the Heart Association meetings? Because, as I said, people of your scientific pedigree get invited all over the world all the time. Why'd you say yes to Bram?
There's many reasons. I like to, and I'm going to admit to something here, is I say yes to science that's interesting, also to people and to locations. So I think, we've studied some cardiovascular issues and we're actually getting more into this. I got to meet Chikwe before and that personal connection helped. And I love New Orleans. So what's there to say no about?
That's a great answer. My wife's family is from the New Orleans area, so we also love New Orleans. One of the things that you've been hitting upon, which I'm going to go back to Brahmaji in a minute, but I'm going to ask you first, is that we really try to engage young people in our meeting, our graduate students, our postdocs, our fellows, both scientific and clinical fellows. When you describe what you do, you smile and you get excited. Talk to us about staying excited by science. How do you get your students and your postdocs excited about science?
That is such a good question. And you mentioned the Nobel. Nobel was an interesting moment for me because many people right afterwards asked me, now that you received this, what are you going to do next? And I was kind of perplexed when I first heard this question, because as if Nobel was a goal and now I have to change it. And this kind of made me more think about what I love, what I enjoy. And this is why I got into science to begin with, is because the joy of discovery, a student coming in and telling me, you got to come look at the microscope and see what I found, is one of the greatest joys of the reason I do this. External validation like Nobel is great, but if you're going to be honest with yourself, if you're going to be fulfilled in your profession, you have to enjoy the process. And I love the process, and I'm so glad to hear that you think it shows.
It's funny. As Bram knows, a lot of what I've done over the years is very large scale clinical trials. And I always tell our research group, the answer doesn't matter. What matters is the process of getting there. Did we design a good study to answer the question that was posed? Can we assure ourselves that the answer we're going to get is the right answer because the study was well designed, we collected the data? So I'm with you. It's the process of getting us there. And yes, the answer is important, but knowing that you got a correct answer to the question that you asked, to me, is the most important. Bram, How are you thinking about engaging our young people? Because old people like you and me like to go to meetings because we see our friends and we're used to going to meetings. But young people like to do this. They like to be on video. They like to, you know, Instagram, 3 minutes, TikTok, etc. How are you engaging our young people for the meeting?
Boy, that's also a wonderful question, Bob. I think that what we're trying to do is a couple of things. I think what we learned, as I mentioned earlier, coming out of pandemic, is there's really a need in this day and age to have a lot of different channels in which to share science and information. And, we have accelerated some of the processes we were having in terms of virtual meeting access and on demand. Um, but I think that one thing that's been very important for Joe and I to think through is trying to understand what it is that draws people again. And I do think that there is an information sharing piece of this, but I think it's more about community. Again, sometimes I'll be very honest, we can learn more just staying at home and reading Medscape, for example, and then getting the daily meeting notes if that's all that you're really interested in. But science is much more than that. And in fact, like what Ardem was saying earlier resonated with me, which is, using this meeting to kind of really motivate and inspire young people so that they can go back and work and understand that the problems that they are tackling are really important. They're important not only today, but they're important for the future as well. And I think that that's even more important these days than even in the past, as kind of our institutions are struggling a little bit. In some ways, science feels a bit like it's under attack. And I think that this is a moment where meetings like the AHA scientific sessions can make a broad impact. I will say that that's a big problem that we've been thinking a lot about. We certainly don't want it to be, we're all together but alone, right, at a meeting where, you're walking around, you don't know people. Like you said, when you go, you have old friends that you're connecting with. And sometimes people who come for the first meeting, they don't have that opportunity. So we're trying to think of creative ways in which we can, leverage those networking opportunities. We have an early career day on Friday before the larger meeting starts. Ardem has been working with us. One of the things I've loved about this is as Joe has reached out to him, one of the things he's insisted on is having early career people as part of his session. I don't know a lot of really just senior scientists who have reached the pinnacles you have, who the first thing that comes out is like, okay, in my session, how do we get early career people who are tackling this involved? So that's a very special thing. But I think that theme is something that's moving throughout the meeting.
I really appreciate you saying that. Also, Bob, to answer your question, when I used to give science talk, I used to focus only on the science. And now all my talks end in the last 5 minutes or so, more engaging with trainees, either trying to give them advice or talking about science as a career, as an approach, or even politics these days of how we should approach it. And I get such great feedback from trainees because they feel like they don't get engaged from that perspective of their careers, their goals, as much as just giving them science. So I think that scientific meetings have to be beyond just communicating newest science, but also talking about career progression, how trainees are experiencing compared to what we did, and having that communication open. And again, this has become more and more important to me.
I love that. And being able to engage trainees should be the most important part of what we all do every day. So I really appreciate that. Ardem, when you had given your opening remarks about what it is you do in the laboratory, you move from touch to chemicals to transport to different baroreceptors. There's a lot of different disciplines that are in what you talked about. Talk a little bit about training in science today and the cross-disciplinary nature of it and the need for teams. This is a big theme of the Heart Association, bringing disparate groups of people together to work together to solve problems. Because what you described is I could see a home in your lab for engineers, for biochemists, for computational people.
We have all three, yes.
Yeah. So talk about that because, as someone who oversees an additional medical school, the graduate school here, I also want to make sure that we're thinking about how we create cross-disciplinary activities.
When I met with Joe, who's, a surgeon in cardiology, we had so much to talk about, and that surprised me. And I was really energized by it. And again, it's this idea that we have very different backgrounds, very different training, but the kind of science that's exciting is at the intersection of these very different fields. And the key is to set up collaboration. So I would say more than half the studies that we publish, we couldn't do it without collaborating with people with very, very different training and very different backgrounds. I'm a basic scientist. I have a PhD. I don't have an MD. And over the years, I've become jealous of you folks who have medical degree. You seem to learn so much in those 4 years about human biology that just reading PubMed from the outside, we never seem to be able to achieve. I've even joked about going back to medical school just for fun. But I think this whole idea of bringing MDs and PhDs, I'm a huge fan of. And of course, I have many colleagues who have both MD, PhDs. And I think it's very, very, very interesting angle to have to look at problems and solutions.
It's funny you say that. I often joke that if I were to go back 30 years, in addition to the MD, I wish I had a PhD in computer science or math because of the things that I do. I wish I was more skilled from a computational perspective. And so, yeah, I think that there's huge opportunities for cross-disciplinary work. Bram, how do we get cross-disciplines into sessions at AHA? Because that's always been one of the challenges, right? You and I are interventionalists. We go in one room. The heart failure folks go in another room. The nurses go in still another room. How do we get more cross-disciplinary education going?
The way that we've thought about this is in a couple of different spaces. So the first is that, with Ardem kind of joining us, one of the things that we've really embraced is that the AHA continues to be foundationally, out of all the scientific heart meetings out there, the one that's most focused on basic science. And we have expanded that piece of our work this year, and it will show, and we've had a great team that's been focusing in on that. In addition to that basic science group, it's like the translational pieces. We've wanted to make sure that clinicians also kind of understand their important role. One of the ways that we've done this is we've tried to, in addition to like having a smaller meeting within a meeting, have some cross-disciplinary programming. A concrete example, we have a core cardiology curriculum that we have set up. So these are, just core topics that will be relevant to general cardiologists as well as subspecialists within the field, as well as like individuals who are in the basic sciences who want to understand what are the clinical problems that are driving much of the talk these days. We are emphasizing within its own theater guidelines. The hypertension guidelines, for example, are coming out this year. They are going to be a major event, and we want to make sure that clinicians are able to distill the key aspects of that. And then the final thing is we are trying to create some talks more around the innovation space. So think of like kind of TED-like talks where you have somebody like Ardem who, just with this, him coming in the fall, like, going on YouTube and catching a couple of his talks. And I have to say that it's exactly what he said, which is that there's not only just the science, but then there's always a little bit that kind of connects people to the broader mission of what we're trying to accomplish. And so that's been really fun to see. And what we do think is many people have science that's exciting and shareable, but sometimes we get lost too much in the details and trying to, again, have people step back a bit so we can kind of communicate with each other more broadly.
I was going to ask you each a final question, and my final question for you, Bram, was going to be, why should I come to the meeting? But you just gave me the answer. So let me ask you, Ardem, the final question. Tough time right now for science. Funding is obviously been a challenge. The budgetary cutbacks, the freezing of grants, the reversal of grants. In some ways, it's very depressing. But I am not a depressed person. I'm an optimist, and I'm hoping you are too. Make me excited about a career in science. Why, if I'm a young person, should I embark upon a scientific career of discovery given all of the challenges in the current environment?
Yeah, I think it is a roller coaster of a challenging time for science, isn't it? Normally, I would say I would prefer just to stay in the lab and do science, but I think these current events have made me realize that we actually have a responsibility to go out there and explain what we do to the general public, to our representatives, because it's such a no-brainer, right? I think investment in science multiplies into the economy, make sure that we're leader in health research and health medicine. And so both economically and respect to innovation, US has been the thing that everybody wants to be like, and to try to minimize this or make hurdles, unnecessary hurdles, is just really um, not something that we should be letting go easily. I do this myself and encourage everyone to do what they can to help make sure that some of these very damaging policies are not going through. You know, I'm an optimist like you too. I'm a U.S. citizen. I came to U.S. When I was 18 years old, and I came from Beirut, Lebanon, which was obviously war torn. That's why I left it. I have a message outside my office. It said, "I survived Lebanon. I'll survive this." I think that's the message, that one has to look at this as a little obstacle course that we will overcome. I think getting excited about science is self-explanatory. You know, this is the golden age of biomedical medicine. We're finally understanding the molecular underpinnings of biology and disease. And with, talk about basic science and clinic coming together with places like UK Biobank and all of us at NIH, where this people's medical records and genetic components are all there for us to find out what really causes what disease. It's super exciting time to do science. And this is not the time to doubt this. We have to double down and make sure, as I said, this is a transient blimp and we go back to doing the kind of science that United States is known for doing.
Wow, that's an answer. And I love the sign outside your office, and I love the optimism, and I'm with you. There's never been a time to do science than there is right now, because the tools that are available to us, the technologies that are available to us, our ability to do advanced computation has never been better.
Absolutely.
And so let's double down. I'm 100% with you. And I know from a Heart Association perspective, the Heart Association's doubling down as well. Well, I want to thank both of you for, first off, taking the time to do this. Ardem, Ramji, this has been a fabulous discussion about not just the Nobel Laureate lecture at Scientific Sessions in November, but really a broader conversation about why do we go to meetings, how do we learn, how do we do cross-disciplinary science, why we should do science, and how to maintain the course when we know that we're doing the right thing. So thanks to both of you. Thanks to the listener for joining us here on Medscape Cardiology. If you like the show, give us a thumbs up. Better yet, if you didn't like it, tell us why and what we can do better. Always send in comments. We appreciate that. Thanks for listening. And thanks to both of you for being our guests today on Medscape Cardiology and theheart.org.
Thank you.
Thank you.